In Philip K. Dick's watershed novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, there are a lot of questions that are asked, not only from the title, but throughout the story. The story itself is a question. Now, the question of the novel really is summed up, though, in the title. When it says, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, it's asking us about the android itself, the artificial human being who is made so much in the image of its creator that it is almost indistinguishable, except when it is indistinguishable from the creator unless you destroy it. That's your first very interesting idea in the title. Do they dream? Do they have human desires? Dreaming, we understand through Freud and through others that dreaming is a state where your innate desires are finally able to be kind of released and related back to you in a form that hides it at the same time, but also presents it in a situation where it's not going to be socially disagreeable, where it's not going to have social repercussions. And of course, that all gets down to the idea of desire, which is a very human thing. And it's the desire of, or the dreaming of, the electric sheep, which goes into the questions of dominion. In the books, it really goes over this, and also in films, how there's so little human life, or so little animal life on the earth, that most people have to resort to having electrical imitations of non-human life in order to kind of resuscitate that dominion, that human dominion over the animals, which we see from Genesis. All of these questions are extremely biblical. All of these questions are innate in the title and in the story itself of the book, which I'm actually not going to go over in too much detail today, because what's more interesting is the films that resulted from that because of their cultural impact on many people today, but of course especially young men who are a little bit disaffected by society. It's very interesting how Blade Runner as a series has very much affected that part of society. But to go into that, we're going to skip ahead to Blade Runner 2049, which came out many years after the book did and the first film. And what we get from that film, more so than question, is the alternative assertion, which is almost a reflection of the question. Very interesting little scenario here. We have a scene with a fake presentation of an already fake female, who of course happens to be the female, artificial female that the character Joe, the artificial intelligent character, main character of Blade Runner 2049, he already has this item, this artificial human, and it's an advertisement of that human that he's interacting with in this scene. And the artificial representation of the artificial woman bends over and points at Joe and says, you look lonely, I can fix that. Very interesting. So what we have is these two alternative statements. One that's not a statement, it's a question. And then we have the statement, which is a sort of dystopic response, right? And in that dystopic response, you get a very interesting enigma about loneliness. And what is it to be lonely? And how is it that somebody can be lonely, or that somebody can understand loneliness, if they don't first understand the positive reality of what it is to be in communication, right? The scene itself is just very emotional because, of course, the Anna de Armas character was already a character in Ryan Gosling's character's life. He went home every day, and he had Anna de Armas plays this like holographic robot woman who's like his companion, and it's not about the physical intimacy at all, especially at first because she's just a hologram. It's about the conversation. It's about feeling like, whether this item that I have bought from somewhere to be installed in my home, is this a real person? And then like the ability to take that fake person into this little USB drive, and the idea of being able to give them human skin through this very awkward but very interesting, very philosophically interesting scene that also takes place in Blade Runner 2049. It raises all sorts of questions about what it is to be lonely and how human it is to be lonely, but not only that, about how the questions of the novel are all about loneliness. It's all about the singular experience of being a human being and lacking the ability to have human dominion, about lacking the ability to say that you are of substance on your own. But at the end of the day, it becomes a theological question about loneliness when the questions of the novel are theological in nature, I should say, when you consider the idea that loneliness is only doubled down the further we get from what it is to be created, right? Or what it is to be in connection with that creator. In fact, a huge central plot of Blade Runner 2049, and I think the reason why it's so cinematically such a success from the story on out, because of course the whole film was just extravagant in how amazingly well they made the sets and everything else. I can't get into all that right now. Great. But there's a nativity story in this, and we're not just talking about a Christian nativity, even though this is a thoroughly Christian representation, or a thorough representation of a Christian idea about nativity. Nativity itself, without that, is super essential to what it is to be human. The idea of us coming from somewhere. And ultimately, it can't be as important just that we come from human parents, right? Or that supposedly there is a Blade Runner robot person out there that comes from a human physical intimacy with a machine. More super essential to that is the idea that human beings themselves are created in an ultimate sense. And that's, of course, where nativity stories are super important. What's important about the Christ nativity, right, is that it is about how humans reconnect with their creator, okay? Obviously, there's an extreme parallel between that biblical concept of Christ's nativity and the Blade Runner 2049 theme or plot. Now, excuse me. There's also, of course, it goes down to the nomenclature. Who's Rachel in the book? It's Rachael. Rachel, in the book as well as in the films, has that physical intimacy with a human and produces an offspring, right? And Rachel is supposed to be barren. Now, that, if you don't know, is the plot of Abraham. I think it's Abraham's wife. Don't quote me. I want to say it's Abraham's wife was Rachel. Yes, it was. And it was Abraham's wife is Rachel, and she is barren, and he has kids with another woman. And then finally, they pray and they wait, and God answers that. God promises a son, and finally God fulfills his promise of having a son, and Rachel's womb is opened, right? That is such an essential part of the plot of Blade Runner 2049, and it comes straight from theological concepts about what it is to be a creation and how important that is to our humanity. Because it's not only important to our humanity that we come from somewhere, that we come from someone, but that someone comes forth from us, that we reproduce that through that intimacy. And that's where Blade Runner is so... it's just such a magnetizing story about that. And all of that intimacy is in reaction to this soulless phrase about "you look lonely, I can fix that." And because ultimately, if we continue to dwell on the idea of going more internal and creating more and more artificial methods of being loved or pretending to be loved, it cannot fulfill us. It needs to be from both ends. It needs to be the understanding that not only are we creating something, but we are coming from somewhere. Not only that we are coming from somewhere, but that we are a continuation of that. That theme is throughout the novel and the films, and it really it's composed already in the question about androids and desire and dominion, because it comes all the way through that down to the level of the animals, but all the way back up to the level of where does humanity even come from. And so that's why it is ultimately a theological novel, and you can do this with probably any sort of thing, but especially a book like this, especially a series of films like this, where you can pick it apart and realize where it all really ultimately leads back to, and why it becomes such a cultural artifact and such a culturally iconic moment for cinema, and especially for disaffected young people, in that it points us back to where we need to go. It kind of points us to the bottom of that self-relating negativity, which Trey's channel over at Telos Bound covers so well. And it brings us back to a point where we can point ourselves toward what makes us really human, which is not only that we are going into something, but that we are coming from there and coming from somewhere, and vice versa. But yeah, just a wonderful book. If you can get your hands on it, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. Perhaps one of the most important, if not the most important, science fiction book of the 20th century. And the films, if you haven't seen them, they're super well done. But I really hope that this gave the people who have read it and watched the films a little bit of something to chew on. And I hope that if you haven't gotten a hold of any of this this media, that you might be able to get into that, because it's just really, it's enjoyable just to watch or to read anyways. The book itself was great. So I'm glad that I was able to go through a few of these things. I know there's a lot in there, and try to do it one by one, going through these different themes and different questions. And I hope that everybody out there got something out of it, and that it was something worth going over. But yeah, you guys have a great rest of your day. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks y'all so much.